An original podcast from podlatino.com.
There's something almost everyone has experienced at some point. Hearing someone say something and thinking, almost instinctively, is this actually true? Not because that person is lying in that moment, but because they've lied before. And once that happens, something shifts. Their voice arrives differently. The words sound the same, but the weight they used to carry is gone. That's what distrust does. It doesn't announce itself when it shows up, but once it's settled in, it's very hard to dislodge. There's a very old story that speaks to exactly that. Not about a massive lie or an elaborate scheme, but about something far simpler and far more human. A boy who lied for fun, without thinking about what it would eventually cost him. The story takes place in a small village, surrounded by hills and open fields. In that place, as in so many others in the ancient world, keeping sheep was real and necessary work. Sheep provided wool, milk, and meat. Without them, life in the community was harder, and watching over them fell to someone young and quick, someone who could spend the day outdoors, making sure the flock stayed together and no dangerous animal came near. That job had been given to a young shepherd, a boy who wasn't bad, who had no ill intentions, but who found the work deeply boring. And boredom, when you don't know what to do with it, can lead to decisions that seem harmless in the moment. One day, with no wolf anywhere in sight and no real danger at hand, the shepherd shouted with everything he had, "The wolf! The wolf! The wolf is coming!" The villagers heard him and reacted immediately. They dropped what they were doing, grabbed whatever was nearby, and ran out to the field. They arrived out of breath, worried, ready to face the threat. And they found the boy laughing. There was no wolf. The whole thing had been a joke, a prank, something to pass the time. The villagers walked back to their homes annoyed, but without making too much of it. He was just a kid. Kids do these things. A few days later, the shepherd cried out again, "The wolf! The wolf!" And the villagers, with a little less urgency this time, went out once more. And again, there was nothing. Another lie, another laugh. The adults returned with a mix of frustration and exhaustion, muttering to each other that there was no point listening to him, that the boy never learned. And they were right. The boy wasn't learning. But what the villagers didn't quite realize was that what they were losing wasn't just patience. They were losing something more valuable, the willingness to believe. Then came the day the wolf actually showed up. The shepherd saw it coming, felt real fear for the first time, and screamed. He screamed with everything he had, exactly the same as all the times before. "The wolf! The wolf! The wolf is coming!" But this time, back in the village, nobody moved. Some people heard him and kept going about their day. Others didn't even look up. They had already learned that that cry didn't mean anything. They had already decided, without putting it into words, that they couldn't trust what that boy said. The wolf attacked the flock, and the shepherd, alone in the field, had no way to defend himself. The story ends there, without much elaboration, not because the details don't matter, but because the point has already been made. Repeated lies don't just deceive people, they destroy the possibility of being believed when the truth finally needs to be heard. This fable is attributed to Aesop, the storyteller of ancient Greece, whose tales featuring animals and simple characters became a way of teaching without lecturing. Aesop is believed to have lived around the 6th century before Christ, though his historical figure is hazy, and many of the stories that carry his name were likely gathered, reshaped, and written down by others across the centuries. What is clear is that tradition credits him with a particular style. Short, direct fables with animals or characters who stand in for human behavior, and a moral that doesn't need to be spelled out because the story already tells it. The Boy Who Cried Wolf is one of the most well-known stories in that collection. Over time, the tale shifted shape depending on the place and the era. In some versions, the shepherd is a small child. In others, a teenager. In some, the wolf kills sheep. In others, the consequences are left more open. But the core never changes. Someone who abuses the trust of those around them and loses it at the very moment they need it most. That consistency across time and cultures says something about the story. It touches something that people have recognized as true across many different periods of history. One thing worth noticing is that the shepherd in this story isn't exactly a calculated liar. He isn't lying to gain something. He isn't manipulating anyone with a strategy. He's bored. He's looking for attention, a little excitement, a reaction. That makes him closer to something most of us can actually understand. A lack of awareness about the consequences of our own actions. The boy doesn't think about a future moment when he'll need people to believe him. He doesn't connect the present to what comes next. And that disconnect is what leads him into trouble. This shows up in everyday life in all kinds of ways, and not always in dramatic situations. Someone who constantly exaggerates so their stories sound more interesting eventually reaches a point where no one can tell what part of what they're saying is real. Someone who claims to be sick every time they don't want to do something ends up being ignored the day they actually are. Someone who always has a different excuse for not following through creates, without necessarily meaning to, a kind of automatic skepticism in the people around them. Not because people are cruel, but because the pattern has already spoken for itself. Trust works like this. It builds slowly, through consistency, through what you say matching what actually happens. And it erodes slowly too, almost without anyone noticing, until one day it's simply gone. There's no single moment when someone decides to stop believing. At a certain point, the mechanism that gives people the benefit of the doubt just stops activating. And when that happens, rebuilding it is slow work, if it can be done at all. What's interesting about this fable is that it doesn't condemn the shepherd forever. It doesn't present him as someone beyond saving. What it shows is a natural consequence of his actions, without drama or divine punishment. The story doesn't say, the boy was bad. It says he didn't think through what he was doing. And that's an important distinction, because it means the problem wasn't one of character, but of awareness, of not thinking ahead. That difference changes how you can read the story. Not as a warning about compulsive liars, but as something more broadly applicable. About the moments when all of us, without realizing it, spend down credit we'll later need. About how certain things that seem small or inconsequential leave a mark that we don't always see until it's already there. Trust isn't infinite. It doesn't replenish on its own. And sometimes, when you need it most, it's exactly when there's none of it left. That might be the hardest part of this story. Not the wolf, not the lost flock, but the silence of the villagers who heard the cry and went on with their day, because they had already learned, without meaning to, not to listen.